Rocket Lab. And Peter, it's always great to speak with you. There's a lot to talk about, but first I just want to start with a broader question, and that is, we're coming off of Artemis 2 making history, Americans and humanity returning to the vicinity of the moon. A lot of focus right now on the SpaceX IPO, which also could make history. Looking at the space, are we reaching escape velocity?
Well, I mean, look, it's super exciting, and I think, and I can speak, for everybody watching the Artemis mission, I think was fantastic, and I think NASA did a really great job of making that, making it feel like everybody was along for the ride. So firstly, an acknowledgement there, it's just awesome. But I think the space industry is just continuing to do its thing, which is grow and expand, and we've talked about this for a number of years, and I think. I can remember probably having an interview with you talking about one day there'll be the democratization of launch and no longer governments will be launching, it'll be all commercial. And then, fast forward today, it seems absurd that a government would be doing launch. So I think this is just, the roll forward of the space industry and what we can expect to happen and just the continual expansion and growth in it. And, it's super exciting and a great time to be alive.
Yeah, so in light of that, what do you think is next? I mean, if we were talking about democratization of launch, and I remember those conversations a couple of years ago, what do you think this next chapter brings?
Well, I think you're seeing some really interesting opportunities. I mean, internet from space wasn't a real thing until relatively recently. Now, direct to device is coming, and in the last 6 months, you've seen the evolution of perhaps orbital data centers and the next, those things will just continue to grow. And I've always said the biggest thing to be done in space hasn't even been thought of yet. And, there's just opportunities abound.
Yeah, and speaking of direct-to-cell satellite constellations, we did just see this big deal announced with Amazon acquiring Globalstar. You are a key contractor within the supply chain for that satellite constellation. Just want to get your thoughts on that, what it means for Rocket Lab and what it does mean for M&A across the industry.
Yeah, well, I think you're seeing spectrum being valued very highly, if you are looking to deploy large services in space, you need, in my opinion at least, you need three things. You need high cadence access to space, which you need your own rocket. You need the ability to build satellites at scale, and you need the spectrum. So as you think about Amazon's rolling out their services, it was fairly logical to me that at some point that spectrum assets were going to be required for them. So not kind of too surprising there, but I think it certainly does value spectrum in a whole new light. Those three elements are critical and key, and various folks will make sure that they hold all those things.
Yeah, you also just closed your own most recent acquisition for Mynaric. What does that mean for Rocket Lab?
Well, it means a couple of things. So, one, if you think about what are the key elements of building satellites at scale, one of those key elements, if you want to move data around at least, is optical terminals. And the optical terminal part of the industry has been a really big pain point, not only for us because we use them on a number of our spacecraft, but for everybody else. Acquiring Mynaric, we were able to acquire, the best terminal company, probably not the best run company, but we'll soon fix that, but certainly the best technology. Going forward, it also gives us a foothold into Europe, which, outside the US is arguably the next biggest actionable market. So for us, it represents two things. One, solving kind of the terminal problem, and then secondly, our continual global expansion.
And we talk so much about increased defense spending, not just here in the US, but globally as well, including in places like Europe. Are you seeing more of those dollars funnel into space activities as well in places like Europe?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just take Germany alone. There's I can't remember how many billions it was, but many billions focused directly on space. And the challenge there is, in a lot of these European countries especially, is they haven't really built the infrastructure or the industrial base to execute on these projects. So that's where someone like Rocket Lab can come along with, complete end-to-end services from, a laser terminal to a spacecraft to launch, and really, solve some of those sovereign issues pretty quickly.
Now, you also just announced a new satellite thruster called Gauss. What does that entail?
Yeah, so I mean, it's sort of following the same thesis, really, like following all the pain points in the industry, and electric propulsion, or EP, has just been a massive pain point in the industry because nobody has really successfully scaled that product and made it really widely available. And once again, we're just sort of healing our own wounds on our own programs here with that. We suffered at the fate of EP ourselves, so. We had a look around and see if there's any good companies to acquire. That's kind of part of our thesis. And then if there wasn't, then we'll just go and do it ourselves. So in this instance, we just went and did it ourselves. So hopefully at least the EP pain point can be somewhat reduced.
And so if we just stick with the satellite and spacecraft piece of the business, I mean, you just mentioned it before, but data centers in space. What does that opportunity look like for Rocket Lab? Are you working on it? How do you see that coming together?
Well, I think inarguably there is going to be some data centers in space for strategic and defense reasons. That makes a ton of sense. Now, will all the data centers migrate from Earth to space? I'm kind of less sure about that. But certainly we want to make sure that we're in a position to take advantage, either if it's a small market or a giant market. And you've seen us announce things like our gigawatt class silicon solar cells and arrays. So if you're going to power these things, then you need gigawatts of solar power. So we developed a very specific product just for that solution. So it goes along with our kind of core values here, is like everything that goes to space, whether we built it or we launched it or whatever, should have a Rocket Lab logo on it. Preferably the largest logo possible, but irrespective, it should have a Rocket Lab logo on it. So we can provide the picks and shovels for the industry, but also we're kind of reached a point now where if we want to go and build something, we have all of the pieces and the scale that we need to just go and do that as well.
Yeah, with SpaceX poised to come public as soon as June, do you think it changes the competitive landscape in any way?
Well, I think it makes some kind of interesting comps in the market. I think that will be interesting. I think it also brings a sense of scale to the space sector that will force much more closer following by analysts and people understanding the space sector. Because one of the things I would say is you talk to investors and it's a very difficult sector to understand because there's just so many fundamentals, and kind of to the downfall you've seen especially some public companies that come public, they make great aspirations and wave their arms everywhere about doing amazing things and then just die. And it's very difficult for an investor to discern what is truth and what is kind of fiction, unless you want to go and do some hardcore orbital dynamics and some maths. So, I think SpaceX going public will kind of solve some of those problems, and provided they do well, also shine a light on the sector that hasn't been shone before.
And of course, we do have comps in the market with Rocket Lab in particular. The stock's been on fire for the last couple of years. We've gone this far into the conversation, we haven't talked about launch. So what is your outlook for the launch market, especially as you look to bring Neutron online later this year in the fourth quarter?
Yeah, so I mean, Neutron is a key part of our end-to-end strategy and puzzle. So we've talked a lot about satellites, as you mentioned, but I think we're in good shape there. We can build whatever satellite we want and at almost any scale we want now. So that's great. But the last kind of piece of the puzzle there is launch, if you want to truly be an end-to-end space company. So yeah, we're working hard on Neutron and getting it to the pad. I mean, it is a dramatically different launch vehicle than just something that is just a straightforward vehicle to go to orbit. And yep, sure, it's taking a little bit more time than we'd also want, but I think it's time well spent, because what we're doing there is we can't bring bring a vehicle to market that is just as good as the vehicle that's currently in the market. That's not a recipe for success. We have to bring a vehicle to the market that is dramatically better than the vehicle currently already in the market. So that's why the vehicle looks substantially different, operates substantially differently, and is important to get right.